Okay, recording has started. Fan 7, talk about that.
Thanks. Thanks, Neil. Hi, this is Claire from Lake Mike Library's Fab Lab Australia. We're running the 7th Fab Lab Asia Network Conference. So we're the spin-off of the Fab Lab Conference that's happening in Mexico this year. So if you want to take a trip to Australia in October, come on down, and tickets are on sale now. EOIs are currently open for pitching content, and you can get a free ticket if you're a successful applicant with content. So check it out if you want to come down under.
Great, and where's the location?
It'll be in Lake Macquarie, just north of Sydney, in Australia, just in New South Wales. So
Wonderful.
we're a pretty easy place to get to.
Great to see that happening. Okay, so last class, the class is going to be about invention and life cycle of invention. But along the way, let me recap what I said, but I'm going to recap it again. You're presenting 5, 7, 10, 12. Remember, let me jump back to the project development class. Remember all of these lessons about time management. Every one of them has been led to billions of dollars of failures. And in this case, with a week left, you need to do triage, document as you work, supply side time, work in spirals, manage parallel tasks, and focus on the system integration. You need to make the presentation.png, presentation.mp4, put it in your root directory. And for the final project, you need to answer all of these questions. And in your slide show and your video show what is the conception of the project, how did you make it, and show that it works. And you'll see lots and lots of examples. Here, I'll adjust this. Lots and lots of examples from prior years. And so with that, on to the final class. And so I want to talk about 3 things today that are context for, we saw all of these wonderful projects coming. What is the life cycle of an invention? So the main thing I'll be talking about is intellectual property and commercialization. But along the way, excuse me, I want to first talk about invention itself. Now, it may seem that invention is just this magic thing that comes out of the air, but I want to talk a bit about where it comes from and how you manage it before I transition to talking about IP. And then after IP, I'll talk a bit about commercialization, not at arm's length, really looking at it, what it means for you. So invention. This is a very influential report. Vannevar Bush was at MIT. He was tasked after World War II to write a report to the president on science essentially won the war. And so the question was, how do we keep the scientific apparatus going? And this report led to the creation of the National Science Foundation. And that helped inspire many other countries, their science funding body. So our modern notion of funding research really you can trace to this report. However, I'm not a great fan of it. Rush Holt is a colleague who wrote this essay taking stock of the report recently. And this report assumes basic research, applied research, applications, commercializations are separate steps and kind of go in a pipeline, rather than feed back and feed forward. So applications going backwards into research. So I like to think about what I do. And in fact, I'm going to make a note to add something here. Let me, the link I want to add to this page is the following. If you do TEDx MIT Feld, for TEDx MIT, I did a talk on the idea of ready, fire, aim. And okay, here's the link to it. So I'll put that in the chat and link it to this page. The point of ready, fire, aim is almost every project in my lab has failed. But along with failing, something better happened. And so the traditional description is ready, aim, fire. You get ready, you aim at a target, you fire, but that can only hit what you aim at. Instead of ready, aim, fire, aim is you do your homework to get ready, but then you don't aim carefully. You do something without a lot of thought, but then you aim afterwards and you see what happened. And that way there's room for surprise. So here's an example of that. I was working with the companies that make low-cost theft tags in stores. And so this was a student thesis on that. And we needed a way to read many tags at once. And so I started studying how radio signals interact with materials. And that led to a way to make a quantum computer. And so that led us to do the first faster than classical quantum computation. Came out of just studying shoplifting tags in stores. Then that in turn led us to discover a very sensitive way to sense molecules. And that in turn turned into a startup that made the reference platform for RFID tags. And so I didn't plan all of those steps, but that was an example of ready, fire, aim. Another part, so you need an environment that lets you do things without being sure why you're doing it, that lets you play and experiment. Another really important function is traffic, where you may not realize you've done something useful, but you need somebody else who can tell you that. So an example of that is many years ago, I worked on with Todd Mackover on making a cello for Yo-Yo Ma with sensors. And I was using a capacitive sensing on the bow, and his hands was interacting with it. And so that led to my first student thesis ever, which was seeing with electric fields. So this is step response, but now it's an array of electrodes and analyzing them to see how something is moving in the field. That inspired Penn and Teller, the magicians, to do a Las Vegas show where we used that to contact Houdini. And then that became a $100 million a year auto safety business. So airbags were killing infants in rear-facing child seats. And auto companies needed a way to see who was sitting in the seat and how they were positioned. And so an auto engineer came by my lab, saw what we were doing, and we took the Las Vegas magic trick and we packaged it up so it looked like a car seat, took it to an auto show, and the car companies all said, how do we buy it? And again, that became a $100 million a year business. And I wasn't thinking about auto safety systems. They weren't thinking about what I just showed you. But the traffic that let us run into each other is what led to creating that business. And so that's all about ecosystems. So this was a report that showed uh, Kendall Square around MIT is these few blocks, and businesses spun off from MIT fall between India and Russia in economic output of trillions of dollars a year. And of course, close that. A very important ecosystem is Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. These ecosystems bring together the kind of traffic I'm describing, and a mix of basic research and applications and funding and all of the things to create an environment for invention. Those are physical places. And what's so important about what we're doing right now is the Fab Lab network is an ecosystem in that sense, but it's defined not by being a single geographic place, but it's a network. Each of you is a local hub of people connected into a global network. You can't do this by yourself. You really need to be in an ecosystem for invention, and that's really what we're creating in the Fab Lab network. And just one final notion on that, the all-in program, you heard the recitation, and there's a follow-up class you're encouraged, welcome to participate in, about who gets access to these environments. And in particular, many years ago, MIT, a group showed that women were being mistreated relative to men. They had less lab space, they had more obligations. And this was a really notable report where MIT made that public, showed the relative mistreatment of women compared to men, and did a huge initiative to try to address that. Likewise, this was a similar sort of thing at MIT, recognizing issues with legacy of systemic racism and looking how to address that. And something I really respect is, as those have come up, MIT's highlighted rather than hid those to try to really address those issues of who gets access to the environment. And so these are, it's an ongoing challenge, but in-depth reports about equity for gender and race. So these thoughts of ready, fire, aim, traffic, ecosystems are just a bit about thinking about, as you progress, how you curate environments that facilitate, encourage, and provide access to invention. That over time, it's not just you, it's the lab you're working in. And for many of you, it's the labs you'll be creating, where you need to think about how you manage environments for invention. So that's just a bit about invention. So now let's progress. Now you're up to an invention. So, we had the clock you have to walk in and out of, and we had the responsive pillow. Each of those are inventions. So how do you manage the invention? I'd say intellectual property is one of the most misunderstood things we encounter in Fab Labs. Inventors come in misunderstanding how IP works. So there are patents. And so in the US, it's the USPTO. I think every country has a version of a patent and trademark office. So the obvious thing to do is, once you have an invention, you patent it to protect it. So you've invented the clock that responds to distance, and the patent protects your invention. So you can make money from the clock and nobody else can. There's a lot wrong with patents. So I'll explain patents, and the real thing to take away in advance is all of the problems with patents. So I'm going to describe the US system. I'll talk about how it relates internationally. And there's some differences, but most of this is similar internationally. So there's two types of patents. A utility patent is what something does, and that's 20 years from filing. A design patent it has a shorter duration, and that's how something is designed rather than what it does. And typically, utility patents are stronger. They give you stronger. Design patent is for a design. Utility is for the way something works that can be embodied in many different designs. So typically, utility patents are much stronger. The first thing you need to do is a search. So the USPTO has a search page that is helpfully not loading. Okay, oh no, there it just came in. They relatively recently redid this. They have this very powerful search tool that's somewhat confusing. Let's see. So here are 33,000 patents related to toothbrushes. So USPTO has a search page. Google has a search page. And so here are all sorts of patents on toothbrushes. So the first thing you do is you start with a search. And now, when you do the patent search, be prepared because almost anything you think of, you'll see something in the patent literature that's close to it. So you may be discouraged because you find somebody else patented what you think is your invention. If all you've done is reinvent something that's known, then you can't patent it. But don't be too discouraged because um, you need to distinguish yourself from what's come before. But typically, and I'll talk about the standards, it's not that hard for you to innovate over an existing patent to be able to get a new patent. So you search. Now, disclosure is where you tell somebody that you have an idea. Private is you keep it to yourself. Nobody knows you have the idea. Public disclosure is you tell the idea. So public disclosure means anybody can get access to it. So talking about it in the Fab Academy goes on the website. Anybody can learn about that. That counts as public disclosure. On the other hand, if you put something in the repo, but you don't talk about it in a video of the Fab Academy, that's not public disclosure because somebody wouldn't be able to find it. Once you disclose, in the US system, there's a year to file from public disclosure. In most international jurisdictions, you can't file after public disclosure. So it's very important you file before you disclose. So even in the US, we're very careful to always file before we do public disclosure. And the one other note is you can disclose to prevent other people from patenting. So a defensive disclosure is you make an idea public and you use that to prevent somebody from patenting because it's been disclosed. And so, for example, there's the IBM Systems Journal. This is nominally a publication from IBM on IBM related research, but one of the reasons it exists is defensive, that if you put something in there, to take that example, it's a way to disclose stuff to protect somebody from patenting something that you don't want anybody to patent. So then come provisionals. So it's a lot of work to do a full patent. Initially, you may have an idea, but it's not fully fleshed out. So a provisional is a handy thing. Excuse me. A provisional is where you say, I have an idea. My idea is a clock that responds to distance. The provisional, it isn't yet a full patent filing, but it puts on record an idea. It's not public. You file it with the patent authority, but it's not made public. You have 1 year to convert, which means turning the provisional into a full filing. That year gets subtracted from your 20 years. So it takes a year off from the life of your patent. But what it lets you do is register an idea. And these are very quick and easy. The provisional just needs a description of the idea in almost any form. And they're very low cost. And I'll talk about the cost in a little bit. So they're fast, easy, low cost. And so in my lab, we file many provisionals, and many of them we abandon. The idea doesn't mature, so we don't make a full filing. But we pick a subset that we do want. But once you have the provisional in, you then don't have to worry about disclosure or somebody else beating you to the idea. So typically, the step after your invention is a provisional to buy protection. And yeah, I'll talk in a little, Ricardo has a note, I'll talk about the cost of all of this in a little bit. So then after the provisional comes the full filing. So a full filing, once you make the filing, it becomes public. So in some cases, people elect to keep something as a trade secret rather than patent it, just so nobody knows what it is, because it becomes public. And the key thing the full filing has to do is be a teaching, meaning a teaching is somebody skilled in the art can follow your filing and learn how to do what the invention is. So it's not, here's my idea, it's here's to actually implement the idea. And there's an art to writing these. Ordinary people can't write these. You almost always use a patent attorney. And the heart of it is the claims. So if we go to let me see if I can find one of these. Okay, so here's a patent on microfluidic bubble logic from my lab. And so the patent has an abstract, a summary of it. It has a description that describes the patent, but all of that almost doesn't matter. There's drawings, those matter more. But I'm going to keep scrolling where we get to the claims. So that's all. We're still doing descriptions of the drawings. Oh, let's see. I'm looking for the claims for that. Maybe let's see, okay, good, they're right here. So all of that is narrative, but the thing that actually gives you protection are the claims. And the claims are sort of like a tree. The claim is the thing that you actually get the patent protection on. And you start with general claims, and then you refine them into more specific ones. So this is a patent on electropermanent motors. So in fact, it's related to what we were just talking about. This is a way to make high torque at low RPM where you don't need power to hold your position, something we did for robotics. And so we claim this is the actuator, and these are the parts of the actuator. And then as you go through this tree, we're refining it into, we can use the actuator to make an inchworm motor. You can use it in a number of different contexts. And so the claims are where you take the top level idea and you refine it to many different types of applications. And that's what you actually get the protection on. It's the claims. If the claims are too narrow, the patent isn't useful. If the claim is too broad, it'll get rejected from the patent office. And so there's an art to getting the broadest claims you can get that gives you the most protection, but is admissible from the patent office. And then there are four main types of patents. A composition is what is something made out of. A method is a way to do something. An apparatus is a piece of equipment, and a manufacturer is something you produce. And so you mature your invention, and then with the help of a patent attorney, you turn that into a full filing. So once you've done that, you then submit it. So you go to the USPTO and apply for a patent. In theory, anybody can do that. Again, in practice, it's so specialized, almost always you do it with a patent attorney. And then it gets examined. So the three things to know are novel, non-obvious, useful. So they first ask, is your invention novel? Is it new? Second is it non-obvious? That's asking, it may be novel, but it may be trivial. Then the third thing is useful. It has to do something with utility. Even if it's novel and not obvious, it may not do anything, so it has to be useful. So that's what you need to ask. To be patentable, it has to be novel, it has to be non-obvious, and it has to be useful. Now, the next issue is the patent examiners aren't always the most sophisticated scientists. And so there's quite a range of patents that are nonsense. Here's a filing on a hyper light speed antenna that violates the speed of light, which of course you can't do. And then there are many, many of these kind of filings. This is one to make infinite energy by harvesting the energy of the vacuum. And of course you can't do that. The patent literature is full of patents, surprisingly, that violate physics that don't make sense. In theory, the patent examiners check that. In practice, they may not understand it. They may have too much to do. So it's not that hard to get a patent. And in fact, there's a lot of patents that should never have been issued because they violate basic laws. Next thing is the response time. It can take years to get through examination. It's not a quick process. They have a huge backlog and it takes a long time to get through. Once you have the examination, occasionally you get a complete rejection. Occasionally you get a complete acceptance. Almost always you end up somewhere in between, where you'll get a restriction that says you're claiming too much, you need to focus it. And so you have to split the patent into one or more what are called divisionals. You may have some of your claims accepted, but some of the claims rejected because they might infringe something else. And so you need to refine your claims. And so you work with the examiner on the restrictions. Then there's a number of areas in patent law that are very murky. So one is, can you patent genes? They exist naturally, but they have applications. One is, can you patent just simply a business practice itself? Like one-click shopping was a historical example. One is software patentable? And a really big one right now is API interfaces. Are APIs themselves protectable? All of these are subject of very active litigation. They're very murky for what is and isn't protected. So you go through all of that, and I had uh, it, it, I had a recent case where the examination of the patent just didn't make sense. And so there's an appeal process, but also there are, let's see, I'm making a note on appeals. There are what are called supervising patent examiners, which are, you can essentially go over the head of your examiner to a head of the office and point out the examination didn't make sense. And there's a mechanism to do it. And I had a recent case where just the examination didn't make sense. We went to the supervising patent examiner and they agreed. They said this examination was wrong, and they corrected it. So once you get through all of that, you end up with a patent. Next thing is PCT. So PCT is a cooperation system internationally. There is no international patent. There's no international patent office. You have to file nationally. So what PCT does that is useful is it coordinates on the examination. So if you go through examination in a PCT country, other countries can reuse that examination rather than having to do that each time. But you need to nationalize. So if you want your invention to be global, you need to separately file in each patent jurisdiction. It's getting better in Europe. In Europe, each country has a national patent office, and there's been many years of working towards harmonizing them, towards creating European-wide patents. But once you have your patent, in any of these scenarios, you have to pick where you want it to apply, and you need to go through each of these national bodies to nationalize. And that can take a lot of money and a long time. Now, to get your patent, there used to be some divergence where some jurisdictions were the first person to invent gets the patent. Some were first to file. First to invent means you needed to keep a notebook to prove what you did when. But at this point, I believe all the jurisdictions now have moved first to file. And so the reason that's sensitive is you have an invention, but if somebody sees your invention, even if it's not public, and beats you to filing, they get the patent because the patent office doesn't ask who invented it, it asks who filed it first. So you need, if you're going to protect it, you need to get the patent in so nobody else can beat you to protecting your own invention. So phew, after all of that, you get the patent. Then the next thing to know is you need to pay to maintain it. So there's a straightforward maintenance, which is there's fees you need to pay to the patent office to keep it active. But there's another kind of maintenance I'll talk about now, which is to keep the patent active. And this is the main part of this discussion. The patent does not protect you itself. All the patent does is give you access to litigate. And this is the biggest misunderstanding. So you invented, here's my patentable coffee cup. I've got a patent on the coffee cup. And then next week, I see somebody selling an invention, their coffee cup, and it infringes on my coffee cup patent. So somebody is infringing my patent. And so I say, you can't do that. You're infringing. And if I'm a little inventor and the infringing is a big company, they'll just kind of laugh and say, okay, take us to court. And that's the point. There are no patent police. Nobody looks out for your patent. All the patent does is let you litigate. So you have to go to court. And in fact, it's really nasty because this is an article on a little town in Texas that's been destroying the US patent system. And there's current work on changing the law about that. Trolls, NPEs, and submarine patents are all versions of abuse of the patent system. And I described that Ready, Fire, Aim $100 million a year auto safety business. We had somebody sue us for infringing. They were what's called a non-practicing entity, an NPE. They didn't have a business that did anything other than patent lawsuits. And they had some patents that it didn't make sense. They didn't really have anything to do with what we're doing. And they said we were infringing and took us to court in one of these they're really sort of corrupt judges. They're a jurisdiction where they file that. And if they have more lawyers and they spend more on their lawyers, they can exhaust you just simply by litigating. So trolls buy up lots of patents just simply to litigate. Submarine patents are where you make a patent and you keep quiet about it until it pops up to try to attack. All of these are versions of not competing fairly about inventions, but just using patents. Once somebody's making money, you try to attack their patent to get money. And nobody's going to defend for you other than you. And you defending means getting lawyers and going to court, and you can spend lots of money. And so there are many bitter inventors who have an invention, but they lost because of big companies just spending more on their lawyers in court. So patents don't protect you, they just simply let you litigate, is the really important thing to know. So it makes sense, well, first, to go through the numbers. A provisional you can do for about $100. A filing is about $1,000. A filing all the way through to issuance, you can do for maybe $10,000. And then nationalizing in more than one jurisdiction ends up being about $100,000. And after doing all of that, then you can also be liable if you don't practice the patent, meaning this is the total cost. And as you go through that stack, most of that cost is going into the lawyers, not the patent office. You need to defend the patent. You can, in fact, if you have a patent, but you're not defending it, you can be liable for not practicing the patent. So patents are useful when there's two key attributes. One attribute is you can identify infringement. There's a way for you to tell who's doing it. And then the other, and this is the other big one, is there has to be a barrier to infringement. So almost anything you can do in a fab lab doesn't have a barrier to infringement because anybody can do it in a fab lab. And you can't identify infringement because anybody can do it in a fab lab. So if I work with Airbus on a new way to make a jumbo jet, it's $1 billion investment, only a few companies can do it, and you need the patent to justify the $1 billion investment. And so you can identify infringement and there's a barrier. But for something smaller than that, you can't identify infringement. There isn't a barrier. And so the patent isn't useful except for one thing, which is investors, especially less sophisticated investors, can want patents. And so it may be useful to get a patent, not for the protection the patent grants, but because it helps you to get investors. So the patent is essentially a marketing tool, not a legal tool. So take away from all of that, patents don't protect you, they just let you litigate, and they're not useful if it's easy to infringe and you can't identify it. And so that means most of what you do in a fab lab isn't, patents just don't make sense. They make sense when you're doing something that has a big barrier to, when you're doing something that needs a large investment, with only like, a few big companies that can do it. That's really where patents have the most traction. So take all of that as a caution against the issues in patenting. So compared to that, then there's copyright. Copyright is underappreciated. A copyright, it's really as simple as the copyright mark. A copyright protects a creative work. So if you make a story about a wizard with a mark on his forehead, that's a creative work and it's copyrighted. Nobody else can make a movie or a book about that wizard. But copyrights apply to technical content. So you can copyright a design, you can copyright software with no question. Just in the software, you have a copyright. Circuits, you can copyright. Mask works for chips, PCB layout. Those are all considered creative works and they're protectable with copyrights. Copyright rights include the ability to reproduce it, to modify it, to distribute it, to perform it, to use it, to display it, to show it. Unlike the patent, you get the copyright simply by creation. You write a program, you put a notice of copyright in it, and that's all it takes to get a copyright. You can register a copyright. So there's a process to registering a copyright. That's not necessary, but it helps strengthen it by creating a paper trail. And then once you get the copyright, it's good for your lifetime plus 70 years. And so you're not copywriting an invention, you're copyright the embodiment as a creative work. And so copyrights compared to patents are easy to get and are much more broadly applicable. And so it means somebody can't use your creative work. They could, what they can do is a clean room redesign. So Phoenix came about, IBM in the original PC had the BIOS, the low-level code. What Phoenix did was a clean room reinvention. They took the specification of what the BIOS did, but they put people in a room where they never saw the code and they rewrote it from scratch. And IBM said, no, you can't do that, that's ours. But it was clean because they hadn't touched anything that was copyrighted. They just reused the specification. And there's current litigation now about whether APIs can be protected that way. But so somebody could do a clean room reinvention of your invention, but other than that, they can't because they infringe. Copyright doesn't protect against prior use, which is if somebody's already doing it. And there's notions of fair use of things like if I take a copyrighted work, but I teach part of it in one of my classes at MIT, I don't need a license for that. That's considered fair use. So once you have the copyright, you can decide what are the terms by which it can be shared. And so so first of all, open source doesn't mean free. And this is a common misunderstanding. IBM has been struggling in various ways as a company. One of the most successful parts of IBM making money is Red Hat that they bought, which is completely open source. So Red Hat is an open source company. What they sell is not proprietary software. They sell systems and support, and their open source business has become one of the most successful parts of IBM. So open doesn't mean no money, and that's a great example. So there's many kinds of licenses. So Creative Commons is a great platform that has a whole family of licenses that let you pick what rights you want to grant and what rights you want to maintain. GPL, BSD, MIT, Apache are all licenses you'll see. And then here, a better way to show this is if you go to mods, and if we open a workflow, and then we open one of these modules, you'll see this. This is something I worked out many years ago with help from MIT's lawyers. If you go back to these licenses can be many pages long. So here, I'm going to, this is the GPL license. And so all of that has to go into your creative work to show its protection. And I wanted something simpler. So I wanted a tiny license that says the main points. And so this language, which I'm calling the Fab license, says the work may be reproduced, modified, distributed, performed, displayed. Those are the properties of a copyright. I say it must acknowledge the mods project. This is my condition. It has to acknowledge where it came from. Here's where I say it's copyrighted. I'm keeping the copyright. And then I have two simple protections. It's provided as is. There's no warranty. Users take liability. Those are just me clarifying what happens is up to you. And so with copyrights, it's up to you to define the terms to get it. Now, once you've done that, comes enforcement. Again, there aren't copyright police. If somebody infringes, nobody's going to protect you from it, but the copyright now lets you litigate. And so, all sorts of cases of successful prosecution to protect copyrights, where you can take somebody to court for infringing your copyright. One other note is if you pick a license, it's actually very messy to change the license. And so generally, you want to do that carefully to keep the license throughout. Frosty, question?
Yes, I have a question on, I'm a little bit thinking about like the AI, like the GitHub Copilot and also like ChatGPT,
it's a complete train wreck. So
yeah.
AI.
So
but let me just jump right into right now, if you look at like news on AI copyright infringement, every which way, almost all of the AI sites are absolutely infringing on copyright, and almost all of them are in court right now. And there's some new ones emerging that are trying to work around that. The AI sites were trained on copyrighted material and then are reusing it without preserving the copyright. And so it's a mess right now.
So like if we use ChatGPT or Copilot, we cannot like open source the code, or how do we acknowledge?
So your question is every day right now this is changing. So
yeah, okay.
some of the AI engines have been built around not infringing copyright. Let's see, I forget. Some of them say they'll back you up if you use the paid version. Your question, again, it's really sort of literally day by day that some of them say they'll protect you. Some of them say you're on the own. Some of them are curating their content so that you can use it without infringement. The AI large language models came out way ahead of copyright law without anticipating this or just expecting to be sued. There's, I mean, I'm showing you a couple of these links. If you read about it, it's a mess. It's an entertaining mess, and it's in rapid flux. Yeah. And then finally, OSHWA which has close connections to the Fab network, is an association of Open Hardware Summit, Open Hardware Organization, which is devoted to doing open source software practices in hardware, which is similar but not exactly the same. And so OSHWA is a good embodiment for that. And then finally, trademarks are not copyrights or patents. A trademark is, for example, McDonald's or Boeing. Trademarks you establish by saying it has a trademark symbol after it. You can register trademarks here. And again, there's no police. You have to litigate. And a common question is, we don't have a trademark on Fab Lab, which means anybody can use the term Fab Lab. The reason is, if we had a term on Fab Lab, we would have to, every time you say Fab Lab, you'd have to say Fab Lab TM after it. And anybody who used it incorrectly, we would have to take to court. Otherwise, we wouldn't be protecting our trademark. And we didn't want to be the Fab Lab police. So we make it so if somebody misuses Fab Lab, it's clear that our use of Fab Lab is better, more interesting. You get more resources, more information, more global connection. We keep ahead of abuse of it. We don't try to protect it as a trademark. It is a conscious decision. But you can trademark if you want to. Like we had the game machine. That could be, that name for the game machine could be a trademark. So against all of that, it can be useful to get a patent if it helps for inventors or marketing. It can be useful to get a patent if you're really going to scale commercially where it's needed for the business model. Otherwise, most of what you're doing in a Fab Lab, patents just aren't a good match. On the other hand, you can copyright everything you're doing easily. And copyright doesn't mean secret. Copyright can be open or closed source. Copyright can be free or revenue generating, but it protects creative works, and copyrights are a great match for things you do in Fab Labs. Okay, so first step is create an invention ecosystem. Second is you're going to create intellectual property, and you work through this tree of decisions. And again, you can have revenue generating, but open source, non-patented, copyrighted work, for example. And Red Hat is a billion-dollar example of how that can work. So then you want to get money from your invention. So some general thoughts on that. And this flows into, I had mentioned, we're working on creating, actually, I'll talk about incubators at the end. So one reason to get money is because you want money, of course. But one reason to get income is for your invention to be sustainable, for the impact and for the social consequences. And so there are reasons to look for revenue that go beyond just you want to get rich. But now here, a common mistake is once you've invented your thing, your clock that responds to distance, the obvious thing to do is the business is to sell the clock that responds to distance. But paradoxically, selling your invention is often the worst way to get money from the invention. So the straightforward thing is a product. So some of my students started Formlabs. It's now a billion-dollar company with 1,000 employees, and they sell the Formlabs printer. And in fact, to that point, if we go to the Fab Academy site, schedule, we had a great recitation on startups, going from small to big, early to late. And there's a video posted on the class site of each of the startups describing their journey, all broadly coming from how to make. So you can sell the product. It is a lot of work. You need to develop the product, produce it, ship it, license it, market, maintain it. But Formlabs is an example of that. Prusa is an interesting example, completely open source. And something nice that Prusa does is you can buy the finished product, but you can buy a kit of parts. And rather than Prusa doing the work, they produce the parts, but you assemble the finished system. So they take out the need to do the final assembly and shipping, and you buy the kit from them. You can sell consumables. So Gillette is the classic version of what's come to be called a razors and blades business, where they sell the razor cheaply. It looks great, a nice razor, buy it cheaply, and they make their money selling the blades. The blades are inexpensive, but you need to keep buying them for the lifetime. And so you sell or even give away the product, and you make your money selling the consumables that go into the product. A way to make your business is from licensing. So ARM is the main chip company that's completely won for mobile devices, and it's been expanding in data centers. ARM doesn't produce chips. What they sell are licenses. So when you buy, if we go back to here, the yeah, let's go back to Fab Academy 2024 schedule embedded programming. So under the ARM family, these are all different vendors making ARM chips. The business model is ARM designs the basis of the chip, and then you license from ARM, and there's some patents, but much of that is copyright, and you pay ARM to license their design. And so the chip companies take on all the work of actually making and selling the chip, and ARM has historically a nice business. It's under challenges now, but ARM has a nice business where their business is selling the license to the design, not producing it. Somewhat historically controversial for various reasons now is it took Google quite a few years to realize their product was search. And they started by selling search, and they realized what's more valuable than selling search is selling that people are searching. And so they became an ad business. They didn't in any way start as an advertising company, but it became one of the most successful business models where you sell to advertisers that people are searching. That's led to a lot of ills in how the internet works, but that's an example of that. You can create a platform, and so as apps began to emerge, for Google and Apple, the platform itself becomes an important part of the business. You can create infrastructure other people use. So AWS is a big one, but some of my former students, for example, are starting a cloud knitting business to have sort of knitting as a service as a cloud platform rather than selling the knitting machines directly. And then services. So for many years, we tried to start the Fab Foundation as a nonprofit because it was worthy, but it wasn't succeeding in funding. And then we started to sell the services of the Fab Foundation, and that's when it took off. So services are one of the best business models you can take out of the Fab Lab. One is how do you run something? How do you run a lab? One is what do you need to supply the lab with? One is customization. If you have a class, if you're making furniture, rather than a standard furniture line, you can pay to have furniture customized to your needs. Education, the Fab Academy is teaching classes. As students, you pay to learn. We work hard for you to get value from that. You paying to learn gives value into the labs. Entertainment, obviously entertainment is going to a movie or a concert, but for example, you can have projects in the lab where people come and make fun stuff for entertainment. There are all sorts of ways Fab Labs sell impact, where Blair in Detroit, working with at-risk youth, was showing better life outcomes than social services on offer. And so the product was the transformation of youth in the lab, carefully measured. The impact on the people in the lab was what the lab was selling. And research is growing. And in fact, I'm working to try to develop something like the National Science Foundation, but for the whole Fab Lab network as a research funding body. And so many of the most successful business models don't sell the thing. They don't sell the thing you made. They sell the benefits of making it. So, Nuria's program with girls in Leon, she's not selling what the girls make. She's selling the impact on the life of the girls. And many of these examples of services out of the labs are much better business models that meet all of the attributes compared to actually selling the thing you make itself. And so this distinction between selling the thing versus selling the benefits of making the thing, peeling that apart is like the difference between Google selling search or selling that you're searching, which became one of the world's most successful business models. Two final notes. Generally, for a business to succeed, somebody has to be in pain, and you reduce their pain. Almost all of these examples come from reducing a problem, not from simply a vision. And a good principle is you can't push on a string. You can't force somebody to buy something you're doing. You have to pull on a string to pull them to something that you want to do. You have to be pulling, not pushing, is a good principle. So all of that goes into, once you have your invention, what you sell often isn't obvious. And so who pays whom for what can be the thing you invented, but much more often it's something about the benefit of what you've done. It's doing it as a service, not as a thing. So now you want to try to make your business. For profit, sole proprietors, it's just you. A partnership is you and a few people, but you're liable for the company. An LLC is pretty easy to create, and that distinguishes between your personal liability and the company, so that builds more structure. A step after that, that's a nice thing, is an employee-owned trust is where a group of people own the company. And so ShopBot was a privately held company, but they made a decision to turn it into an employee-owned company. So all of the employees participate as owners. And then finally, we get to corporations. And so takeaway from this is it's pretty straightforward to work through these steps. You don't need to pick one and stick with it. These reflect stages in the growth of a company when you need more structure. For a nonprofit in the US, most common is what's called a 501c3. So the Fab Foundation falls under that. Nonprofit doesn't mean no money. There are 501c3s with billion-dollar revenue. You can have a huge amount of income, but it's not profit. It covers the costs of everything to do with running it. And you can mix those. So for example, Mozilla has a for-profit corporation and a nonprofit foundation housed in the same organization to be able to have access to both. And then this is my brother Alan's company, and it's an example of a dual bottom line where it's a for-profit company, but they're also accountable and have to measure social impact. And they have funders that fund them specifically because they're a dual bottom line. So because they have social impact and educational impact, they have funders who fund them not just simply because it's a company that's going to make money, but they get funders because of the multiple bottom lines. And so it's important to think about who benefits from your company, and benefiting more than just making money can help your company succeed even in very narrow reasons. And then an evolving thing connected to blockchain is other ways to measure economic output. There's been some versions of trying to create Fab coins. So work you do in a Fab lab anywhere in the world is recognizable in another one, still evolving. So to fund your business, almost always it's a version of spiral development. There's funding rounds. You can get money from venture capitalists. Good ones help you develop your business. Bad ones take a lot of equity away from you and put a lot of pressure on you. You can go into incubators, I'll talk about in a minute. Angel investors are investors who have made money and turn around and do small investments to help you get started. Friends and family is a common funding round where you literally get friends and family to get seed funding. Platforms like Kickstarter. So Formlabs had one of the most successful Kickstarter campaigns where they posted to Kickstarter and they had $100,000 goal and they raised $3 million. And that gave them funding to start the business. But these last ones are increasingly more feasible and really important to be aware of. So a loan is where you get money from a lending agency like a bank and have to pay it back. But what can make that work is purchase commitments. And so a purchase commitment is you've invented your invention, and then you find somebody who does an agreement with you of if you can make 1,000 at a certain price, they agree they'll buy them. Then with that purchase commitment, you can then go to a bank and get a loan to produce them. But the bank doesn't take any equity on you. They don't put any other pressure on your business. It's just purely a financial transaction. And then once you sell 1,000 of them, then you can, to sell the 1,000, you might have to go out to a contract manufacturer, but then you use that to buy a machine you can bring in-house to produce them more cheaply, and you bootstrap from there. And so combination of crowdsourcing loans, pre-purchase commitments, and bootstrapping makes it increasingly more accessible to develop a business without having to take outside funding that takes equity away. So then, as your business grows, there's many common issues. Let me add one. So one issue is the business plan more often than not fails. Once you encounter reality, what you thought your business is might not be what the world wants. And so you need to be prepared to let go of what you thought your business was and pivot to what's actually useful. So Thing Magic was started by former students. They had visions of like making the world interactive, and it turns out they made radio frequency tag readers, but that's what the world wanted. Need for a management team. So like in the Google example, Sergey and Larry needed Eric Schmidt and team to come in to take the promise of the search, but to actually figure out what is the business and how does it grow. In scaling, there are all sorts of scaling issues. One is cash flow. Your business is doing great. You have customers, everything's producing, but the gap between when you have to spend money and when you get money leads to a big shortfall that's a growth problem. One is when you're a little company, everybody knows and loves everybody and you work together. And once you get up to maybe 40 employees, suddenly you have things like theft and sexual harassment and absenteeism and all the annoying things that like human relations offices do and bureaucratic things. You have to start introducing those bureaucratic things because of just any organization that as it begins to grow runs into those problems. Your funders may push to make you sell the company before you're ready because they want to get their money out. And a big one is limitation of the founders. So quite often the founders of the companies are the wrong people to run the company. And there's a very awkward period where they kind of have to get pushed out. Like Max at Formlabs was a rare example of an inventor who turned out to be really good at running it. More often than not, at a minimum, like Bill Gates needed Steve Ballmer to make Google work. Wozniak needed Jobs. And at some point, the skills of the founder aren't the skills of the more mature company. It can be very awkward in the life cycle of a company to move the founders out when they're limiting growth. And so all of these, it may seem really challenging to start the company, but as it begins to grow, these are all really common problems that recur to anticipate. And finally, there's a number of accelerators, incubators, and manufacturers, and what they're looking for is you. You, on this call, represent the skills of vision, invention, and all of these pipelines need that. And so there are a number of different versions of these that'll help you do everything I said, help you find investment, help you go to market, help you scale, generally taking some part of the company in return. And one of the projects I'm working on that's still nascent is to build an incubator where the Fab Academy brings the program to you, you don't go to it. In the same sense, we want to make a distributed incubator where you can be where you are, and we bring the incubator to you. And so that's one of the current projects I'm working on developing as a coming attraction. So with that, a little bit about how you create an environment for invention, a lot about IP on the challenges of patents, which can be relevant, but often not, and the important role of copyrights. And then a tour through thinking about ways to get income, and some pointers into accelerators and incubators and manufacturers. And with that, we're up to the end. And so your job is, or let's go back to the bottom here, is to get your slides linked right away so that we don't have to hunt for them on the site. And, oops, sorry. Then remember all the lessons about project management to use the remaining time well. And finish your final project, get ready to present it, and then get ready to come celebrate in Mexico, physically or virtually. And so with that, okay, Adrian is going to do, continue to do Saturday time. Fabulous team that's underused on the Saturday sessions. They have many scars from everything we're talking about. Let them help you. Yeah, Ricardo is noting test your player on different browsers, different plugins, different operating systems. Yeah, Garrett's noting Saturday session. Anything you can think of you're having trouble with, bring to them. They're great problem solvers to use them. Supply side time. Make a schedule for the remaining time. Use it. Schedule every day until you're done. And with that, that's the last class. So I'm dreading last minute, my slide and video aren't linked. Please avoid that. And I'm eagerly looking forward to seeing your projects and then meeting all of you in person. And that ends the Fab Academy lectures in this cycle. So I'll say goodbye, stop recording, and see. Oh, sorry. A reminder, the final presentation site has minute-by-minute timing. And you have just a few minutes. And so you need to be ready to unmute. You need to practice your presentation. I'm going to hold you to a very tight cycle for that. So be prepared for the very, practice for the very close, tight cycle for the presentations. And with that, I'll say goodbye from the woods outside Seattle. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Takk fyrir kærlega. Takk fyrir.
Bye.
Bye.
Hasta luego.